Hi, my name is Peraza-Santiago, and today I'll be talking about lexically-mediated compensation for coarticulation, also commonly referred to as LCfC. The question that has long concerned cognitive scientists is the interaction between higher levels of processing and sensory information. Specifically, whether top-down information can modulate perception or if it has a post-perceptual effect. We know that lexical information eventually influences interpretation of speech sounds, but we don't know when and how this happens. For example, if a person were to listen to a word-to-non-word continuum, such as Christmas to Christmas, they're more likely to make a perceptual decision consistent with the lexical endpoint. In other words, they're more likely to report hearing the word Christmas. Interactive theories and models like the trace model propose that higher levels of processing can feed information backwards to boost activation of lower processing units and directly influence perception. This can be seen by the interaction shown here between the word and phoneme layers. However, proponents of autonomous models argue that lexical effects, such as the example I gave earlier, can be explained by a post-perceptual decision bias. In this model, information from word and phoneme units is combined post-perceptually in an entirely different layer of processing. Ullman and McClellan devised a paradigm called lexically-mediated compensation for coarticulation as a means to resolve this debate. This paradigm combines two effects: the lexical effect I just mentioned, and another called compensation for coarticulation. Let me explain this because the logic is a bit intricate. We start with place of articulation and coarticulation. Sounds like t and s are produced relatively far forward in the mouth, whereas sounds like k and sh are produced relatively far back. But if a talker has to produce a sound with a back place of articulation immediately after a sound with a front place of articulation, they may not reach the canonical place of articulation for the second sound, resulting in an ambiguous speech sound because of coarticulation. In the early 80s, Reb and Mann showed that listeners are sensitive to these kinds of contingencies and they compensate for coarticulation. They did this by demonstrating that if subjects are presented with a front-to-back continuum in isolation, they show the expected categorical perception of these two sounds. But if we precede the continuum with a sound with a front place of articulation, such as the s at the end of Christmas, their perception shifts as though they attribute the ambiguous sounds in the middle of the continuum to coarticulation. This results in listeners likely interpreting the ambiguous speech sounds as k. In LCfC, Ullman and McClellan reasoned that if lexical information has a top-down influence as the interactive model predicts, then a lexically restored phoneme should be able to drive compensation for coarticulation. This is exactly what they found, and at first seemed to be a clear demonstration of interaction. But further studies attempting to replicate LCfC have been inconsistent. About 60% of studies have found positive results, but 40% have shown weak or null results. Our objective is to try to determine whether these inconsistencies reflect spurious positive results or possibly weak materials in some studies. We realize that most LCfC studies have not piloted materials to be certain that they can find context effects in simple compensation for coarticulation before combining materials in the LCfC paradigm. Therefore, we extensively piloted many potential stimuli to find items that could separately drive lexical context and compensation for coarticulation effects. Once we identified items that could drive the effects separately, we conducted a well-powered pre-registered LCfC study. We presented 40 participants with one of 4 context items like questionnaire, but with an ambiguous final phoneme immediately followed by one of 5 target items with a 5-step front-to-back place of articulation continuum for a total of 100 trials. Subjects completed 6 blocks of all possible trials in random order, bringing the total number of items listened to by each participant to 600. We also conducted a direct replication to validate effects. We obtained a significant effect of the implied place of articulation of the context item, indicating robust lexically mediated compensation for coarticulation in both the first experiment and in the direct replication. We can see this here in the differences in average front place of articulation responses under the different implied place of articulation conditions of the context words. These results provide strong evidence that a lexical context can influence lower level perception. This supports the interactive account in which information is fed backwards from word to phoneme units in order to boost perception of potentially ambiguous speech sounds. Magnuson et al. 2018 argued that this feedback provides particular benefits in noisy conditions, which is fundamental to perceiving a highly variable signal like speech sounds. Our study also highlights the importance of extensive piloting to guarantee the baseline effects are being produced. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to your questions.